Welcome to Pause for the Truth, where you can sit back, relax, and hear an honest dialogue about health, wealth, legal, and social issues. The hosts are Dr. Rogers Kane, family practice physician, and Jocelyn Turner, health education consultant, with co hosts from the Northeast Florida Medical Society and its foundation. Stay tuned for the truth about matters affecting you and your family. We're here to tell you what's really going on and why.
Good evening, everyone. Happy to see you joining us again. Happy that people are here to join us one more time on our broadcast. Not the last time, our podcast. Not the last time, but another again, as they used to say back in my grandma days. To join us another again. Um, Tonight, we are welcoming back Dr. Shanique Wilson. Dr. Shanique Wilson, welcome. She is a gastroenterologist here in Jacksonville. She is doing good work. Most of your, I think most of her work is being done over at Memorial. Is that right, Dr. Wilson? Yeah.
Yes, that's right. I'm mostly a Memorial, but I also scope at the outpatient endoscopy centers at Orange Park, South Side, as well as Riverside. So I kind of cover the whole area.
All over, right. Yeah. So, and, welcome, Ms. Turner. How are
Good
you?
evening. Hi, Dr. Wilson.
Good evening.
Good
It's good to see you again.
to see you as well. So I think we've
So,
gotten started.
no, we just doing the intros. We were um, uh, the discussing a few things that Tyrone with his old self was talking about. With his old self talking about stuff that happened back in 1960 when I was just a baby. I don't know why he talking about it.
Ain't that the pot calling the kettle?
Anyway,
Well, I'm excited to have Dr. Wilson join us again, of course, about this very important topic. And if anyone has ever known anybody who had colorectal cancer, it's a pretty sad thing. And I can tell you though, Dr. Wilson, I know this is not about me, but I sure hate when they call and say it's time for that dreaded colonoscopy.
Yeah.
But I
I don't.
understand.
I look at it as a life-saving venture for myself.
Oh,
So,
absolutely, and the best sleep ever, right?
Of
yes,
course.
exactly. I wish they
And
could package it to go home with.
we
Yes,
actually
indeed.
also have newer prep, and the low volume preps actually made it into the multi society guidelines today. So all the major GI
Great.
societies released guidelines about the low volume preps, and I think patients like them a little bit better. They don't have to drink a whole gallon. It's about like a liter split into two 500 milliliters. It's really good.
Does it taste good?
So my prep, so I've tasted many of them. I still like Miralax the best, even though it's still high volume. It mixes very well, and if you mix it in something that doesn't have um, a strong taste, then it's not going to hide in it very well. So I like mixing it in things with very strong taste, like broth and Powerade instead of Gatorade, because I like that tastes better. So there's different tricks you could do. We usually tell patients Gatorade, but I personally don't like Gatorade, so I've researched different options instead of the Gatorade.
Well, I tell you, my secret, Dr. Wilson, is, and I believe I have it right. In terms of the allowable beverages that you can have, I'll have two glasses in front of me, the disgusting prep, and some white grape juice or ginger ale. Oh my goodness,
Yes,
I do chirp,
yes.
chirp, 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 and it works well. But again, enough about me. I want to talk to you for us to really get an understanding of what colorectal cancer is and why it is a major health concern.
I'm sorry, I missed that first part.
So tell our audience, because some people, we're not going to make, I don't think we should make the assumption that people know what colorectal cancer is and why it's a major health concern.
Of course. Well, so colorectal cancer is, I would say, the very first thing that we should know about it is preventable. It is a cancer, yes, but it is preventable, it's treatable, it's beatable. And so that's number one. So your colon is basically your large intestine. So when you eat, it's the part of your intestine that actually makes the stool become stool. It absorbs water. And sometimes patients develop polyps, which can go on to become advanced polyps. And those polyps, if left unattended, will become cancers. So that whole process takes almost a decade, if not more, to occur. So it's a very, very slow cancer. And for that reason, I personally believe that no American should die from colon cancer because we have plenty of opportunities to catch it when it is small. We have plenty of opportunities to prevent it. Um, and so it's one of those things that if you're not looking for it, you won't know it's there.
And
Yeah,
so
Miss
when you're
Turner,
going in
you
for your
wasn't.
colonoscopy, then that's where you all will find the polyps and then you can remove it. Is that am I getting that, Dr. Wilson?
Yeah, click, click.
Exactly that. So when I do my colonoscopy, oh, sorry, Dr. Kane, did I cut you off?
No, what I was trying to do was alert Miss Turner because she was not here. We knew you had to get inside. You're trying to get inside to get to your desktop, and so Miss Turner, we can talk about just something real quick because it takes her a couple of minutes to get in.
Okay. All right. Well,
Okay.
good, Dr. Kane, because I had a couple of questions about you. So go ahead, Dr. Wilson,
Uh-oh.
as you get settled. So, Dr. Kane, I talked to you earlier, but I really didn't get a chance to get into it with you before Dr. Wilson rejoins us on the discussion about colorectal cancer. But if anyone can hear, I have picked up a little bug, and people always tease with me
Mhm.
because I am notorious about wearing my mask. Well, I decided I'm going to be like Rome and I won't blame it on Rome, but I'm going to be like other people and go without it as much as they are. And so I went out this weekend, different places, and I got a little slack and didn't wear my mask. So are you seeing many people in your practice who are having either the flu or RSV or COVID nowadays, or just a plain old cold, Dr. Kane? Because I tell you what, I want to know who passed this thing on to me.
I'm seeing a little of all of them. They had that. So, that was a time we had that triple demic in which it was RSV, COVID, and the flu. And so these days, I'm really trying to discern whether or not the person has the flu or COVID. I'm not seeing as much RSV. I'm not as much RSV as I did maybe about 6 weeks ago.
Okay.
Okay, but I am seeing quite a bit of COVID, and I call it the watered down form, in which you're not seeing is the deaths obviously that we saw in the past. It still will kill with some people who especially are immunocompromised, and it's still also so can the flu though. The flu has also been a killer and still is a killer. I do encourage my patients. Some of them come in and say, Dr. Kane, why are you still wearing a mask? And the first thing I tell them, I said, you do know who come to doctor's offices, right? And they say,
Sick
what do you
people.
mean? I say, sick people. So if sick people are coming to doctor's offices, you are coming, it's like going into the lion's den. So I tell them I wear my mask, not just to protect, and my staff, me and my staff wear our mask, not just to protect ourselves, but to protect our patients from
Yeah.
other patients. We don't
Yeah,
want
because
to
you
act as
mentioned that you have an older clientele of
population.
patients.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
Yes, but you also have your mom that you have to be thinking
Right,
about. So while
right.
you may not be old, and don't let your mama hear me say this, she is older, and your job is to protect her from you in terms of bringing something
Absolutely.
home. So my wife,
Absolutely.
she's a little on the. I make sure I don't bring anything home from the office to give her. So I'm really, really still wearing masks in doctor's offices, especially because that's where doctor's offices, hospitals, emergency room, That's where sick people are. So that is where you're going to see more COVID, flu, and anything else possibly.
So, if I know I am under the weather, I picked up a bug, who should be wearing the mask, me or my mom?
You the one picked it up. You should be wearing.
That's what I thought. But and I say that the reason I say that is because we tell people, protect yourself and wear a mask. But I think if the spreaders would cover up and wash their hands and not, and not spread, then the other folks won't pick it up. You know what I mean?
I agree. That's like when you go in the hospital, the patients aren't the one that need to be protected. I mean, are not the ones spreading the germs,
Right.
to other patients. It's the caregiver going from one patient to the next patient to the next patient. And they
Yeah.
are the ones that potentially can spread infectious diseases. And these days, we even got the measles, even though you and I, because of our age, and
Yeah.
uh, we're protected against the measles, but there are many people out there that is becoming an epidemic at this point, pretty close to an epidemic, because all these unvaccinated kids are out there. And what people don't realize, measles ain't just a rash; they can kill.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that because that was going to be my next question, Dr. Kane. What about the measles? Because I know I never thought that I'd see an epidemic, if you will, or influx of measles cases as there are. The only thing about it, sadly, so many folks who are in positions have discouraged being vaccinated for the measles. And people are listening to those folks because typically in past years and over time, those were trusted messengers for dispersing information about what's best for us and our families and children or whatever. But the American Academy of Pediatrics, as well as some other physicians associations, I believe, are still recommending that children are vaccinated against the measles. Am I wrong?
Nope, you're absolutely correct. It was not that long ago that we were touting and bragging about how we've eliminated measles off the planet Earth.
Yeah.
And we, not just from the United States, but we said off the planet Earth. Unfortunately, there are the naysayers out there, and people that just don't know what the hell they're talking about, that are saying, don't get the vaccinations. It's got this in it and that in it.
Right.
I got the measles vaccine 100 years ago, and I'm still here. Okay,
Right.
the vaccine did not take me out, but the
Yeah.
measles could have taken me out
Right.
if I was not if I had not been vaccinated. You remember we had a big, well, you may not remember, you're too young, but that was a huge effort that they used to come into communities in the town where I grew up at. There was uh, a movement afoot by the local government to have everyone come into a couple of different places, and they were mass vaccinating against the measles, and measles, mumps, and rubella, obviously, the
It's not
so-called
it,
germs.
it's not too far in my background because I remember I started at the health department in 82, and I recall going out with our school nurses and other public health nurses in schools ensuring that the children were vaccinated against those childhood with those childhood vaccinations. And again, sadly, back in the day, people would trust the public health nurses and other trusted messengers that encourage.
Right,
Unfortunately, there are some other folks who are such skeptics, and sadly, they're doing just the contrary. They're discouraging
right.
folks, from getting vaccinated. I thought that people learned, quite frankly, from the COVID vaccine. People learned a lot about vaccines and how they work. I assumed with folks getting vaccinated and seeing that they didn't die from COVID, that moving forward that they've learned about the importance of vaccinations.
No, and sadly, and then we're going to get, I guess I think it's settled right about now. Sadly, the two people that wrote into the chat box. One was that Miss Griffin was saying, these kids may not share anything with each other except germs.
Right.
And share
Yep.
that with
Yep.
themselves, between themselves and their teachers, okay, which then go home and give it to their kids or their parents, yada, yada, yada. And the other is, yes, measles, mumps, and rubella can last a lifetime if properly vaccinated, okay? And if you have suspicion that you may not have been properly vaccinated, a lot of times what we do is just go ahead and test for the antibodies to make sure that they're not there, or that you, well, not them, sorry, to make sure they are there in sufficient enough form to prevent a new case of measles amongst that individual that has been vaccinated.
And
But
go
with
ahead.
that being
I
said,
just say, I just want to say one last thing, Dr. Kane, before we bring Dr. Wilson back in. Why not just go ahead and get vaccinated? And that's one less thing to worry about, right?
because they listening to knuckleheads that don't know what they're talking about, and sadly, it's up on the highest mountaintop, so to speak,
Yeah.
that some of this news is coming from, and it's trickling down to other ignoramuses, ignorami, but to others that are not as smart as, say, Dr. Wilson is, uh, even not as smart as Tyrone. Think about it. When you,
Tyrone say, hey, what are you trying to say?
I'm trying to say that Tyrone knew better. Not his mama knew better, and he knows better than not to doubt his mama. When she told him to get that vaccine, he went right there and got that
Absolutely.
vaccine. Okay,
Exactly.
and
Exactly.
that's what I mean by that. Listen to mama, and you'll be fine.
Right. Exactly. Well, we're going to bring Dr. Shanique Wilson back in. Dr. Wilson is a gastroenterologist, and I love saying that word, Dr. Wilson, because it's a long one, and I like making sure that I say it properly.
And you sound smart.
We're talking about colorectal cancer, and before Dr. Wilson moved from the car to, I love how people are so dedicated. This is important enough for her to drive home from work, long day at work, and hop on the podcast to talk to us about colorectal cancer. Because if you didn't know, March is Colorectal Cancer Awareness Month, and we like to bring up topics that are important in our community. And Dr. Wilson, welcome back. And I would like to, I know we were talking about what colorectal cancer is, and I love what you said, that it's preventable if only people will go in for routine examinations and know that the prep for the colonoscopy, as our other favorite doctor, gastroenterologist, says, it's the gold standard. That's what Dr. Rawls always say, the gold standard of getting or checking for colorectal cancer. But I want to transition to asking, who is most at risk, Dr. Wilson, for developing colorectal cancer?
So I would say the people most at risk are the people who aren't checking.
Mm,
They're the most. So every person age 45 and above should be getting screened, or like at age 45. And then people with a family history of a first degree relative, so mother, father, sister, brother, should be getting screened earlier, at least 10 years earlier than the
wow.
age of diagnosis of that relative. So if your relative was diagnosed at age 50, you get screened at age 40. If your relative was diagnosed at age 39, you get screened at age 29. And that
Wow.
is to try to capture as many patients as possible to prevent death, really.
And some of the basis for that was what you mentioned earlier. I mean, it's a 10-year, I don't want to say it's a 10-year disease, but for lack of better description, it takes about 10 years from the start of that polyp to being benign or not being non-cancerous to becoming cancerous. So that's a basis behind what you just gave. It wasn't just arbitrarily picked out of the sky, if I'm not mistaken.
Exactly. So on average, it takes somewhere between 10 and 15 years for a
Wow.
tiny polyp to become a stage one cancer. So when we see these big cancers, or we see patients with cancers early, one of two things has happened. Either they have an aggressive cancer that is rapidly progressing, which rapid for colon cancer is over like 5 or 6 years. It's still not rapid.
Right.
Um, and or theirs started when they were quite young, younger than, you know, people who were, let's say, you know, born in the 60s and born in the 40s, for whatever reason, we have colon cancers being diagnosed at older ages in our older populations. But in our younger populations, we have patients who have no family history and they're being diagnosed super early. I think the youngest person I've personally diagnosed with colon cancer that had zero family history was 21.
Wow.
21. Oh my God. Well, you know what though? I'm glad you mentioned that because that was going to be my next question. And I remember when I was at the health department and we were having these discussions about it. I mean, look at our diets, right?
Mhm.
People are. I remember growing up, going to get fast food was a treat. Now
Mhm.
it's a regular diet for so many people, and so that's why there's so much push for people to grow their own gardens and eat more fresh fruits and vegetables. There people are just really trying to push that and discourage people from using fast food as your first choice of food. But a lot of people say, but it's cheap. You get cheap burgers or cheap this or that. But I say you pay now or you pay later, unfortunately, with your health issues.
And
Yeah.
you pay much more later. You
Yeah, and who
know,
wants to be diagnosed with colon cancer at 21 years of age?
wow.
Mhm.
I've seen
Yeah.
29. I have not seen 21.
Yeah,
Um,
21 was shocking for me, but hers at the time was stage 1, and unfortunately, she was one of the pediatric patients that had ulcerative colitis for many years,
okay.
and she developed colon cancer. Um, but she had no family history of ulcerative colitis, and
Hmm.
like she just had a very difficult to treat disease. So, she opted for a total colectomy, so she was completely cured.
Wow.
Hmm.
Oof,
Wow.
that's tough.
So, are there any surprising risk factors people may not know about?
Yeah, so there's actually quite a bit. I would say number one is alcohol. Like we've
Mm,
known for some time that alcohol is a known carcinogen, but I think that I think the American Cancer Society last year was the first time they actually like said it to the public that, hey, this is a carcinogen, you guys. Like we don't know of a safe amount. So we can't even say like, well, if you're only drinking 1 or 2 drinks a day, we know that if you're drinking less than 1 or 2 drinks a day, we can prevent cirrhosis. But if you're talking about cancer prevention, we don't have a safe number. So alcohol, smoking, you have red meat, you have deli meat, you have processed meats. All of those are somewhat known carcinogens that do correlate with an increased risk of colon cancer. So, me personally, you're not going to catch me eating any hot dogs. You're not going to catch me in line getting any pub subs with like boar's head turkey. I'm getting the chicken tender sub all the time. It also tastes better. Um, and then lack of fiber in the diet is another big one. So, they found that patients who have a very high fiber diet, so for most men, that's at least 30 grams of fiber per day. For women, about 25 grams per day. They decrease their risk of colon cancer overall, even more so than like the average risk of colon cancer in the States. And then lastly, we know that colon cancer is a disease of the West. It's not something that we're seeing often in like sub-Saharan Africa or places where we don't have industrialization. And the rates that we're seeing now somewhat mirror our advances in technology. So there is something to be said for, environmental risk factors. We just haven't pinpointed them yet.
When I was in medical school, they taught us rarely do you see that being taught, but they taught us about the origin or one of the factors that made us aware of the role that high fiber plays in colon cancer or I'm gonna say colon cancer prevention for lack of a better description, but the role that high fiber diet plays in not seeing as much colon cancer in the population. If it was that Bantu tribe in Africa is where they actually made note of that back in the 30s, 1930s. I'm gonna say late
Wow.
30s, but it could have been middle 30s. And it was simply because, just a little novice fact, simply because when those so-called discoverers and explorers was over in Africa and they saw these huge piles of dung, and it was not an animal dung. And they were trying to figure out where it come from, and it was from members of this Bantu tribe that because they ate so much fiber, they were going 5-6 times a day, getting rid of eliminating that. And so that whole origin of colon cancer and fiber started on that Bantu tribe in Africa. So,
And we talked about fiber. Last week we had Linda Brown on, registered dietitian. She's going to come back on because it's also National Nutrition Month. And it's so simple, though, Dr. Wilson and Dr. Kane. Fruits, vegetables, beans, legumes, whole grains, nuts and seeds. There are so many good things. Now, when we talk about nuts and seeds, by the way, we're not talking about the nuts that we commonly eat. We're talking about chia seeds, flax seeds, almonds, sunflower seeds, walnut. Dr. Wilson, I haven't forgotten, by the way, that favorite food item that you said you like to eat. Can you remind our guests of what that concoction was that you would mix up? I'm trying to remember, was it a muffin or what was it that you mixed? You said you eat
So I like sweet potato brownies. Okay.
that's what it was.
Yeah.
Yes. So basically it you basically make a brownie, but instead of having like a ton of sugar in it, you use the sweet potato as your sugar, maybe a little bit of honey. There are excellent recipes for it online. They are packed full of fiber. My husband loves them. He asks me to make them all the time. And you can cut them into little squares. And they're also a really good appetite suppressant because they're so rich in fiber. And when you drink a lot of water with that fiber rich food, what ends up happening is that it almost swells somewhat in your belly, so you just don't overeat. So it's a little tip I use to try to not have to pay for Ozempic.
So I love it. So sweet potato brownies. I've
Mm-hmm.
heard people, when I'm looking at nuts and seeds as an option, but I've heard people say they have a hard time passing those seeds, so they typically will avoid them. Is the having difficulty passing seeds, is that due to something else, or what is that about?
Well, sometimes when you increase the fiber in your diet and you don't increase the amount of water you're consuming, the
Okay.
fiber almost turns into like a cement and it kind of takes a very long time to pass. And if you're eating fiber sporadically, meaning some days you're having fiber and other days you're not, what ends up happening is you'll actually start to feel constipated and bloated because fiber keeps you regular, but it's regularly kind of moving slowly through your GI tract. So if you're having fiber on some days and then no fiber on the next day, you're going to be having these like abnormal, irregular bowel movements, and it might look like what you're doing in your diet is actually causing you more symptoms when really it's like lack of consistency.
I think some people that Ms. Turner may be asking about it as well, and you can clarify this up with us, is they think about diverticulitis and what the doctor tells them about not
Oh.
eating nuts and seeds and stuff. And some of them will try to stay away from the nuts that you described, the seeds that you described, in an effort to fulfill what the doctor has told them in terms of diverticulitis and the reason that behind the diverticulitis. Can you help kind of get some of these patients into the right zone as to how they can best
Yeah.
help them?
So I'd say about maybe 20 years ago, that was the school of thought. They thought that the seeds might go into the diverticula and cause diverticulitis. Um, but what we know is at this point is that diverticulitis is mainly related to truly a lack of fiber in the diet. If things aren't moving, things are going to stay behind. And you can imagine the stool getting impacted from constipation into the diverticula and causing irritation. Now, when we looked at studies that actually tested to see if these seeds precipitated diverticulitis, they did not. So I always tell my patients, if you like it, great. If you don't like it, great. I'm not saying that science knows everything because there are some patients that can swear up and down, doc, every time I have popcorn, I have symptoms. And not everything is going to be studied. So I always say, trust your body. And if you know when I get this, this happens, then common sense says just don't do it, you know? But outside of that, if you've never had an issue with nuts and seeds before, I would not change it based on an episode of diverticulitis.
Yeah, that's so funny. You know what, and I tell Dr. Kane that all the time. I say, I ate so and so, and it didn't make me feel good, and he's gonna remind me. So then, why did you eat it? I'm like, thank
Mm-hmm.
you, Dr. Kane. I really break it, saying it that quick. But I wanna pivot just a second. And there was a question about foods high in fiber, and it includes fruits, vegetables, legumes, and beans. And some examples of the legumes and beans are black beans, lentils, chickpeas, kidney beans, green peas,
Lovely.
and whole grains like oatmeal, brown rice, quinoa, whole
Oh,
wheat bread and pasta, barley, um, and apples, pears, berries, strawberries, raspberry, blackberries, bananas, oranges, broccoli, carrots, Brussels sprouts. We'll put a list on our website and tune in next week because we're going to have, hopefully, Linda's available, our registered dietitian, to come on, and we're going to finish the discussion and talking about the food and Dr. Wilson's favorite, sweet potatoes with the skin. So get
Okay.
the recipe for sweet potato brownies, because she already said it. She said it before. But I want to ask you, Dr. Wilson, because I see the advertisements about those take home colon cancer colonoscopy kits, if you will. I can't think of what you call them. I'm not going to name any particular brand, but should people use that versus going in to see the gastroenterologist for a colonoscopy?
I'm going to name it Cologuard. Okay, that's what she's asking about, Cologuard. So
Yeah, so I love the Cologuard mainly because and I don't think you're going to hear this from a lot of gastroenterologists because it does, like, we like doing our procedures, we like knowing for sure that the colon is clear. But the Cologuard is a great option for the average risk patient, meaning no family history and zero symptoms. If you have abdominal pain, like that is a symptom, I wouldn't do a Cologuard for you. If you have blood in the stool and we think it's hemorrhoids, I wouldn't do the Cologuard for you. The patient really has to be the perfect asymptomatic patient with no family history for the Cologuard to be okay. And it should only be used in patients 45 to 75 who have never had a polyp, meaning if you had a colonoscopy before and they found polyps, you are no longer a candidate for the Cologuard. Um, the benefit of the Cologuard is a lot of people are busy and it's easier for patients to do it. Poop in the box, mail it in. It's negative, great. You do it again in 3 years. If it's positive, then you got yourself a colonoscopy because we need to figure out what made it positive. And in some patients, it's a false positive, meaning we go in, you have a good prep, everything's clean, we see nothing. In those patients, I always tell them the Cologuard is not accurate for you. You can't get this again. The next time you do a colonoscopy, it'll be in 10 years, but it has to be a colonoscopy. It can't be the Cologuard. In other patients, it's a true positive, and we go in and we find a polyp. And every once in a while, about 5% of the time, we will go in and we'll find a cancer. But I can tell you, last year of my positive Cologuards, I only found 3 cancers, and all 3 cancers were stage 1.
mm,
They had not metastasized, and it's because of the Cologuard where we were able to cure them with just surgery and no chemotherapy. So
Hmm.
that's the benefit of the Cologuard is because, colon cancer is you don't have symptoms until it's too late. If you have your symptoms of your colon cancer, by the time you get symptoms, you're either stage 3 or stage 4. So anything to get people screened is a good thing.
and
Only
that's
thing
where I
about
agree
it,
with
people tend not to talk about their family, their history, health history, right? So for the people who have that conversation and share about colon cancer, or I had, that they were diagnosed with different diseases, that's fine. But the only thing about it, a lot of people just don't know their family history.
Right.
you. It's a great screening tool for low risk individuals, right?
Yeah.
And that's what I use it as. I had to, it's funny. The Cologuard person came by today and they're going like, can you use more Cologuard and so and so and so, and because We want to improve your colon cancer screening rate. We've been checked, and our colon cancer screening rate is about 95%.
Wow. That's
And,
impressive.
and so because we're very aggressive with making sure that patients get screened for colon cancer. So, because it's one of those things, like you said, Dr. Wilson, it's a needless death if you, for lack of better description, I say needless death. But you shouldn't. Nobody should be dying from colon cancer, or very, 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 very few people would die from colon cancer if we do what we need to do.
So
Exactly.
what are the early warning signs of colorectal cancer that people should never ignore?
The earliest one, if they even get it, would be unintentional weight loss. So rapid weight loss over a short amount of time and rectal bleeding. But I can tell you of the colon cancers I diagnosed in 2024 and so far in the beginning of the year, by the time you have symptoms, it's already stage 3 for most people. So you can't wait for symptoms.
So if
And
someone is diagnosed, what treatment options are available for them today?
So the best treatment would be a curative surgery, which is what I hope for all my patients, where the colon cancer is there, but it hasn't gone through the wall of the colon yet. It hasn't gone into any lymph nodes. It hasn't gone anywhere. So those patients, they get surgery, and then I scope them again in a year, and then we talk about back when they went through that, and they're very grateful. They're very happy. If the colon cancer does spread to the lymph nodes or goes through the wall of the colon, then normally we will start with chemo and then do surgery if it's going to be helpful. Some patients get radiation. It depends on where the cancer is and where it's spread to at that point.
I tell my patients, and I'm injecting so much because I'm on the front line and seeing some of this stuff, and
Mhm.
that's why. But I tell them quickly, if you get screened, and especially when it comes to colonoscopy, and there is a pre-malignant polyp or something of that nature, when Dr. Wilson clip it, you're pretty much cured of that colon cancer just by discovering it early and clipping it at clipping at its source, and then you don't have to worry about partial removing of your colon or
Mhm.
she mentioned earlier about colectomy. I'm not sure if some of the audience know what a colectomy is, but that's a total removal of your colon. So now you got a bag on your side. Okay. There's nothing sexy about a bag on your side, whether you're a man or a woman. And I'm not demeaning anybody that it happens to, but I'm just saying if that's what it takes, which is what I say to these patients, if that's what it takes for me to get you to go get screened for colon cancer, I will use that thread every day.
Yep. And I will say that last year, again, so I'm a little bit more aggressive when it comes to some GIs, just because I'm younger, and it's scary for me seeing people that are in my age cohort having these big polyps and these early colon cancer. It is extremely jarring. So when a patient comes in to me and they say, Dr. Wilson, I have rectal bleeding, I'll be honest, I always err on the side of I offer the colonoscopy because it's indicated at that point. So if you want it, you get it. If you say, no, I want to treat the possible hemorrhoids first, I say, sure, let's do it. But I usually just go straight for the colonoscopy. And there was one gentleman last year who was 36, and he had he had hemorrhoids, and he was bleeding from his hemorrhoids, but he had this giant polyp that I completely removed. And when it came back, it had a small focus of colon cancer within the polyp, too small, even like it was barely visible to the pathologist. They had to send it to University of Miami for a second opinion. That's how small it
Wow.
was. But it was in the polyp. And so now he's cured. That's one. But we also know for his children, we know when to start screening for them. And that's kind of like one of the best gifts you can give your kid is the gift of like, hey, awareness for this health risk you now have.
And siblings, don't forget the siblings. That
Yeah.
if I got colon cancer, I'm gonna send my siblings, all
Hmm.
7 of them, to go get a colonoscopy because
And I think you mentioned the first degree relatives. That's who you're speaking of, right?
Yes.
Explain to our audience who don't know what that means, the first degree relatives.
So first degree relatives are basically anybody in your immediate family. So that means mother, father, sisters, brothers, children. Cousins don't count, grandparents don't count in terms of your colon cancer risk. But it is beneficial to know what those grandparents had if you know. Because I have patients who, again, young patient, saw last week, actually, now that I'm thinking about it. Well, the young patient I saw last week in her 30s, grandfather with colon cancer late in life. She was also diagnosed and had her colon removed last year. So while we can't use that to say like who gets and who doesn't, if I hear that your grandfather had colon cancer and you tell me you had rectal bleeding once and you think it might be hemorrhoids, I'm going to try to tell you to get the colonoscopy just to be sure.
I use it as an excuse, to be quite frank with you. Go ahead and get it done. You tell me
Just get it done.
your grandparent got it. That's good enough for me. I can go ahead and infer, may not be saying it correctly, infer that it's a possibility. It's not as much of a possibility as with mom, dad, sister, brother. But
Yeah. Yeah. But you know that
there's a question.
1% matters to that patient's life that you save.
Right.
And even though it's unlikely for them, you find the one that had it and now you just gave them, another 40, 50 years with their family. So,
Exactly.
yeah,
There's a question that asks, do we know if there's a disparity in colon cancer? I
there
guess they're talking about
is.
if disparities, yada, yada, yada.
Yeah, so there is. So when colon cancer affects Black people, it tends to be more aggressive. It tends to start sooner, and it tends to be caught at much later stages. Um, and part of that is because, lack of access to healthcare. Sometimes people are busy, they're working, and I always say you can't take care of everybody else and everything else and not yourself. Sometimes symptoms are ignored, and sometimes they just don't know like what are alarm symptoms. So I always tell people like rectal bleeding is never normal. If I see blood one time in the toilet, I'm gonna go get my colonoscopy if I haven't had it done in the last 4 or 5 years. So it's one of those things where you can't minimize symptoms as you age. It's not just you know an upper respiratory infection. It's not just a little cold. You kind of have to go to the doctor and have them interrogate your symptoms and use the resources that we have available.
Speaking of disparities, real quick, I'm of the age, believe it or not, I'm back when they were using this straight pipes. They was doing this they called it a colonoscopy, where they just straight up use a straight pipe and then go up in there. It's the most uncomfortable thing. Even for me being the person to do it, it's scary, it felt uncomfortable for me. The reason I mention it is because there was a time that they was doing these flexible uh, um,
Sigmoidoscopies.
sigmoidoscopy.
Mm-hmm.
And they said, well, that's because 70% of colon cancers occur on the left side of the colon. When in fact, when we did the research, when the research was borne out, Black folks had 70% of their cancers on the right side of the colon.
Yeah.
And we speculated at that time, at least at that time, it might have been because we had such high fat diets. And when that fat hit the right side, I'm speculating. I'm not saying that was the case, but we speculated that the discrepancy uh, uh, was it was mandatory for us to go and take a look at the entire colon, and
Mm-hmm.
we advocated to take a look at the entire colon. NMA played a significant role in pushing National Medical Association. Played a significant role in pushing the entire colon be looked at, and not just the left side of the colon, where it was mostly Caucasians that presented with the colon cancer lesions. I don't know how true that is today, but that's
That's
what we saw.
amazing history. I didn't know
Wow.
that.
Yeah. Wow. Speaking of which, I know you obviously, I'm sorry, no shade, Dr. Kane, but looking at the difference between you and Dr. Kane as a young physician, are there any new advances in care for colorectal cancer, or just, for us to just stay healthy, just in the way you treat patients?
So I would say, in terms of advances, there's always clinical trials and research happening, but I always tell patients that I don't want you necessarily to be a part of those. I would much rather prevent the thing than have you get treated
Yeah.
for the thing. So I would say our biggest advances are in actual screening. So a couple of things. What Dr. Kane said about the right side is so true. But I want to even add a little bit more context to the right side of the colon and why it's so dangerous in terms of colon cancer is because the right side of the colon is close to the place that the tumors love to metastasize to, which is the liver. So
Wow.
on the right side, those tumors tend to spread a little bit sooner
Yep.
than the tumors on the left. That's number one. On the right side, your stool, so when you eat food, your food gets broken down into little particles and your nutrients get absorbed, and the waste that goes through to your intestine is still a liquid waste. Like, not all the liquid gets absorbed, it's a liquid waste. And your colon's primary job is to absorb water to make that solid. Are we following? So
Yes.
when food enters from your small intestine to your large intestine, it is basically pure liquid, and then it travels through the colon and it gets absorbed until we get these nice solid poops that all of us are having. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. So do you know, if you have a colon cancer on your left side, remember, it starts from right to left. So the left side is closest to the exit, meaning more water has been absorbed. If you have a colon cancer on your left side, what ends up happening is the stool is almost looking like formed stool. So you might see blood streaking the stool. You might see pain when the stool is passing because you have this nice big log trying to go through this narrow hole that the colon cancer has made. But on the right side, it is all liquid. So the patients do not get symptoms until there's a complete blockage of the actual colon. Okay, until the disease is so advanced that the hole that the stool would normally go through, that the liquid would go through, the liquid can't go through anymore. Does that make sense?
Right. Right.
It
So,
really does.
so that is why colon cancer on the right is so deadly, because not only does it spread early, you won't notice it until it is basically like a stage 4.
Wow.
What I add to that explanation just a little bit, what I add to that is, and I mean, I don't go around looking at polyps, but I tell people treat polyps like it's think about it like it's a stalk of broccoli, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And when those solid stool passes over that broccoli, it can irritate it enough to give some blood. But on the left side, it's not a solid piece going through that broccoli, and it's
That
just
right
flowing
side.
over
Yep.
broccoli.
So
Yeah.
when people look at, I know a lot of times I've learned over the years, and people talk about it often. My doctor tells me to look at my stool. What's an abnormal stool that people should alert their primary care physician, hopefully first, who will refer them to a gastroenterologist?
Just blood. If you see blood, that's not
Okay.
normal. And you see us immediately. Now, it doesn't mean you need to go to the ER, remember, because
No,
everything is growing. But if you
Right.
see blood, you need to see a GI, period.
yep.
So
You see
the
me, that's what I'm
size,
saying.
so being constipated regularly, for example, and having pellets, that's not a sign of anything other than being constipated.
No, but there are, again, so on the left side of the colon, when you have left-sided colon cancers, sometimes the stool comes out like a little string bean, almost
Yep.
like a
Mhm.
little string. If you have a change in bowel habits, Change in bowel habits is one of the reasons to get a colonoscopy. So if your bowels were so regular or you were regularly constipated for years, but then the quality of your constipation suddenly changes, that alone is enough to come to a GI and just have a conversation about what it could be.
Wow, and people probably look at it just the opposite, Dr. Wilson. It's like, yes, I'm so happy that I'm getting a regular stool. They don't see that could be the potential problem for them.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I want to talk about too, because Dr. Kane, again, sorry, Dr. Kane, you talk so much too. I just have to say what you say as one of Jacksonville's best primary care physicians, is the importance of drinking water.
Yes.
Um, is that a conversation you generally have with your patients, Dr. Wilson?
I do. I usually try to tell them to drink about like 64 ounces at least per day. Like, if you're out in the sun, you probably need more. And if you're having these hard stools and you're taking in fiber and you notice that your constipation's not getting better, you might just need a little bit more water. The fiber needs water to work. You don't have any water, you will just have fiber. You've basically, instead of made like a nice soft stool, you basically made like Play-Doh that's just slowly going through your colon, like that Play-Doh consistency.
You're
So
using a
what are your
sponge. I tell them it's like a sponge. You know,
Mm,
a dry sponge going through versus a wet sponge going through. You
gotcha?
mm-hmm.
drink enough water to wet that sponge to pass easily. If
I
you
love
don't,
it.
you got a dry sponge. And that's not
Dr. Kane, do you, for your patients who just say that I don't like vegetables and fruits and what have you, do you tell them or do you recommend that they do Metamucil or Miralax or some of those other things on a regular basis? I'll say Metamucil or products similar, Benefiber, to get that extra fiber a day, or do you tell them you really need to eat food?
all right. So I do tell them you really need to eat high fiber foods first. That's my preference. But when I don't have any other choice because they don't leave me with another choice,
Yeah.
at least do stool softeners and Miralax. But even with those, you still got to drink enough water to
Mm-hmm.
activate them, for lack of a better description, to activate them, for it to work and give bulk to your stool.
What about the difference between the caplets or tablets versus the powder? Is there any particular difference or not really?
I think I'm gonna leave that for Dr. Wilson. What's her preference?
I'd say there's no difference, but I agree with Dr. Kane. Like, I always tell the patient when you get fiber from food, you're getting God's fiber. You're getting, you know,
Minerals, vitamins.
minerals, vitamins, and the perfect combination. I always say, like, you cannot bottle and package what nature has perfected.
Yeah.
So, there's so many options for getting in fiber. And, honestly, if you just threw some chia seeds, like a 1 tablespoon of chia seeds gives you more than one packet of Metamucil will. So it's one of those things where it's lower volume, it's actually a food. Um, and you end up saving some money because you're not paying $30 for the packet of Metamucil.
What do you use? Any suggestions of how to what you can put the chia seeds in? You put them in your brownies too?
Oh no. So in my brownies, it has to be pure, but I love chia seeds in overnight oats. I'm somebody that I don't like certain textures, and oatmeal itself, hate the texture. But overnight oats has a very mild texture to it. It's not so creamy and like that weird like texture that
Yeah.
some porridges have. So it has you just basically put like a half a cup of oats, half a cup of almond milk, with some chia seeds on it, and you just let that soak overnight. And then when you wake up, you add your fruit, a little bit of honey, and it's ready to go. You can make
No.
4 jars, and they will taste fresh on day 4. So I make 4 at a time when I do it. Other things that chia seeds can be added to is any smoothie can have chia seeds added to it. Some people put them in as part of like a salad dressing, but I personally don't like the taste of that. I think my dressing, I don't want it to be all gravelly. But it adds great texture to most smoothies or shakes type meals.
I like that oatmeal thing. So you said a half a cup of oats, and you're talking about the old fashioned in the canister, not the instant. Of course, I like
Yeah,
the instant, but the oats and the almond milk, and then a tablespoon or teaspoon. I don't want to put too many chia
tablespoon,
seeds.
just tablespoon.
Tablespoon,
Mm-hmm.
tablespoon of chia, and then the next day add. That's pretty good, Dr. Wilson. That's a good tip. So now I got to, Dr. Kane. We got to make some sweet potato brownies and some oatmeal with chia seeds. Yummy.
Overnight oats. Yep. You don't have to
Overnight
cook
oats.
anything. You just leave it in the fridge. It's very easy for busy people to get their fiber in. And the meal itself, if you do everything just like that, has about 14 grams of fiber in it. So about half your daily amount.
I'm glad you mentioned that because we didn't talk about that. How much fiber people should get a day? Is there a particular recommendation for men versus women?
For sure. So, at the very least, women should get 25 grams and men should get 30 grams per day. But to Dr. Kane's previous point regarding the Bantu people, they were probably getting way more fiber than that. So the 25 to 30 is the absolute minimum. But if you get more than that, that's also okay. Like it's not a ceiling. The more fiber you add to your diet, you might see bloating initially because your body's not used to eating so good. So once your body gets used to good food and good fiber, you can kind of slowly increase the amount that you're consuming. The average American actually gets about 6 to 8 grams of fiber per day if they're trying. So we have a
Wow.
lot of room to go.
It
Wow.
is nature's Ozempic,
It
so to
is
speak.
nature's Ozempic.
It's so
Okay. And you
nature's
don't want to
Ozempic.
pay $1,000 for Ozempic, you get you some fiber.
Real quick,
Wow.
the infamous Dr. Kenneth Jones, our colorectal surgeon, that has passed some of that on to others. But infamous Dr. Kenneth Jones, he wants us to discuss red meat and colon cancer.
Mm, yeah. So I don't want to get kicked off the panel, but that is a
Nope,
thing.
go ahead.
So there is an increased risk in colon cancer with the consumption of red meat, especially highly processed red meat. So like bacon, okay? Bacon. I know we like our bacon, but it is a known carcinogen. So
Yes,
patients should limit the amount that they're consuming as much as possible, understanding that it's not saying you can never have it, but it's just saying like with alcohol, like every time you consume it, you should be aware that there are health risks.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's true. And sadly though, many of us grew up in our culture where you have to have bacon or sausage for breakfast.
Mhm.
Breakfast is just not breakfast without bacon or sausage, and it's just it's gonna it's a mindset. We're having to retrain the way we look at things. And like you said, you talked about the overnight oats. By the way, I tried that. I thought it was disgusting that it wasn't uncooked, that it was uncooked oats. Maybe I didn't do your concoction, but I did try the overnight oats. I'm like, this tastes like uncooked food. I don't like the oats in general, and then you want me to eat them uncooked? Gross and more gross. But I'm gonna give it another shot, because I definitely
please
don't
do.
want to increase my risk of cancer. This has been great discussion, Dr. Wilson, as usual. We're so happy to have you on. Um, what's the most important message you want our listeners to take away from today's conversation?
I'd say the most important message is that nobody should die from colon cancer. Zero people should die from colon cancer. It shouldn't be a death sentence at any point to any American. We live in a country with some of the best healthcare in the world. So now it's just a matter of screening. So this thing is preventable. And I think prevention is the best cure at this point that we have for colon cancer while we're waiting on actual cures. So don't ignore the guidelines. Ask your doctor if you don't understand like how much risk you're at. Go to follow-up appointments, talk to your family and see, hey, did you have your colonoscopy? Did they find anything? Really understand your risk. And if you are so unfortunate to end up with a diagnosis, just know that it's very treatable, especially if we catch it at an early stage. And that's really the goal.
One
Thank you.
last
Thank you.
question that somebody did ask, and I have to throw it out there, and that is, what is the frequency of bowel movements should one expect to have on a daily basis?
Oh, that's a great question. So interestingly enough, I personally think that if you eat, you should poop. So if your bowels are actually truly optimal and you're eating the amount of fiber you should be eating and you are exercising and you are sleeping and you are regulated, your bowel movements should follow a regular eating pattern. So when you eat, there's something called the gastrocolic reflex, where your body literally says, hey, food is coming in at a certain amount.
Wait, wait.
Let's make room. Okay. A lot of people only poop once a day. And I've had patients come to me because they're eating healthy and they're like, I think something's wrong. I poop after every meal. And I say, no, something's wrong with everybody else. There's nothing wrong with you.
Right.
So that's the truth. Now, technically, based on guidelines, we say once every other day is okay, but that's not optimal bowel habits.
Right. I have some patients that sit back and they will come in and they've had 3, 4 days, well, a little longer, no bowel movement. They finally get some, you know, and then they think it's done. But I'm going like, you kind of backed up there. You only eliminated what presents the first few centimeters, inches that just before exit. I know it sounds a little disgusting, but just before exit, you're only getting rid of a few centimeters or inches of the stool that you have accumulated. And try to remind them that you still got all this backed up stool from 3, 4, 5 days ago that's coming in
Mm-hmm.
constant contact with your colon and giving longer exposure for those carcinogen cancer-causing agents, for those
Mm-hmm.
carcinogens to your colon. So it's very uh, um, uh, acceptable, or what we would like for you to do is to kind of clear out that colon and then have it every day if we can, a bowel movement at least once a day.
Yep.
Well, this has been wonderful, Dr. Wilson. Thank you for the conversation, for your expertise. Dr. Kane, what are your final thoughts regarding today's topic?
I am just so happy that Dr. Wilson came in. I mean, her explanation was smooth and people understood, including me, understanding and learning quite a bit through this podcast. And I encourage our listeners that if they have not had a colonoscopy, get it. If you're afraid of it and you fit the lock, you'll keep it the lock. If you fit those who can use Corrigan, that can use the Cologuard method for screening for colon cancer, that's absolutely fine. But you must at least give thought to, it may not be the right thing for you. That should be up to, have a discussion with your primary care doc, and they will be very aware of it. And we appreciate everybody that is listening in. And Dr. Wilson, as I told you last year, this will not be the last time. I understand some of the stuff we talked about before the podcast, and so I'm giving you time to
Yep.
take care of things, and then we want you back.
Awesome. I love coming back. I'll come back every year if you'll have me.
Thank you.
Or twice a year. But go ahead.
Thank you.
Dr. Wilson, thank you again for so much for sharing your expertise and shedding light on this critical health issue. We appreciate your insights on prevention, early detection, and the importance of regular screenings. To our listeners, colorectal cancer is, as Dr. Wilson said, one of the most preventable cancers when caught early. So don't wait, take action today. If you or a loved one are due for screening, talk to your doctor or visit a place like Boyle and Groover for more information. Thank you for tuning in to Pause for the Truth. Stay informed, stay proactive, and take care of your health. Until next time, which is next Tuesday, tune in for Pause for the Truth. And please, please, please make sure that you subscribe to our YouTube channel and don't hold this good information to yourselves. Make sure you tell your family and friends. Thank you and have a good evening.
Hold on, Dr. Wilson.
I'm here.
Okay.
And there we have it, another episode of the Pause for the Truth podcast in the proverbial books. Our heartfelt thanks go out to every one of you who took the time to tune in. Mark your calendars, we're here every Tuesday at 6:30 Eastern Standard Time. Feel free to join our community on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. But the golden ticket? Subscribing to our YouTube channel. That's your passport to all our latest episodes and exclusive content. A special mention to the wizard behind the curtain, Tyrone Jackson from Call Tyrone IT Services. His technical prowess and unwavering dedication are the backbone of this podcast. Next week, we'll be back with more. Until then, tell your friends, tell your family about our show. Your support is invaluable. And remember, keep that curiosity alive. Keep seeking the truth.